it's always a pleasure to be here and meet old faces, new faces. So Cesare told me that usually in these meetings you start by reciting the refuge prayer, and he asked me to perhaps explain very shortly what this is all about, since perhaps there are some people here who are new to these meetings and don't know much about what this all means. So in very short terms, the prayer that we will be reciting in a few moments says we take refuge in the Buddha, we take refuge in, I don't know the exact terms, how they have been translated, but if we translate it from Tibetan or from Sanskrit, the idea is we take refuge in the Buddha, we take refuge in the Dharma, which is the teachings of the Buddha, and then we take refuge in the Sangha, which is all the community of people who practice the Dharma or the teachings of the Buddha. The idea here is it's a little bit like the word refuge has some interesting thing. Because I think if we are aware that the world, and I'm not meaning especially the modern world or the ancient world, but the place where we live, or the way we live in this place, entails sort of a lot of frustration and a lot of suffering also that we cannot avoid. There are, of course, many nice moments, and of course happiness does happen sometimes, but this sort of happiness that we may have in this condition that is ours, which in Buddhism we call samsara, is a conditioned happiness, and it's also temporary. And sometimes even though we are looking for happiness, even when we open the refrigerator and we are just thinking about what shall I have, and we are actually trying to find something that will give us some pleasure, if not happiness perhaps. But even ourselves, despite the fact that we are searching for happiness, sometimes we sort of spoil our happiness ourselves. Because when we find some nice moment or something that will give us some sort of well-being or happiness, we immediately start thinking, what if I lose it? You know, or what if someone takes it from me? Or how long is it going to take? And what is coming next? And things like this. So in the very moment that happiness happens, we are already in suffering because we are afraid we might lose it. So when we are aware of this condition and that nothing is so reliable as we would like it to be, then the idea of refuge comes in this sense. It's not that we are trying to run away or hide from something, but we are trying to find something, a way, or a state perhaps, a state of being that might be a state of true happiness or stable happiness or sort of long-term happiness or well-being. And so this is the idea of refuge. And when we say we take refuge in the Buddha, it's not in the historical Buddha that we are we think maybe if I get close to him, he will protect me or something like that. The Buddha in Buddhism is much more than a person or a figure, even a historical figure. It's something that we all can become. So when we take refuge in the Buddha, we actually taking refuge in our own potential of becoming Buddhas. This is the ultimate refuge. And of course, meanwhile, we might need or we might aspire to have someone who is embodying this sort of state of being that we think we can copy, or at least we can start to feel how it feels like, at least from outside. And so taking refuge in the Buddha is actually longing for becoming like the Buddha, much more than thinking that someone is going to save me or something is going to protect me or something like that. And then, this is a very short, but because it's not the subject of today. So then the second question, the question comes, okay, I would like to become Buddha or have that sort of state of being which seems to be peaceful and, enjoyable and sort of serene. But how can I do it? How can I achieve that? And so that's why we take refuge in the Dharma being the teachings of the Buddha, but not exclusively. We will talk about that later. So Dharma is any sort of teaching or practice or method that will allow us to become like that, or to actualize our potential. And that's why we take refuge in the Dharma. It's like saying, okay, now I know what I want to become, and then there is a method for that. Then we also take refuge in the Sangha or in the community, or it's the community of all the people who practice the same sort of method, and especially those who have already attained some sort of realization. By realization I mean they have actualized their potential to a certain extent, so they can experience walkers, they know the way and they can sort of guide us through and help us to avoid mistakes and things like this. And also a very important part of that is they can inspire us, because we are sort of skeptic always, and it's a good thing actually. Buddha never encouraged us to be blind faith is not something that we Buddhists are interested in. So being skeptic, it's in a sense it's a good thing. So someone who inspires us is someone whose qualities become evident. We can see them, and so we can say, okay, I'd like to be like that. There is something in this person that makes me trust, that inspires me trust, and that I feel more open. And a very common feeling when we are around someone like those great teachers is we come with we are in our ordinary life, and then we have lots of problems, and then lots of questions, and we don't know how to do this or that, or we don't know how to choose or to decide. And then we take notes, Then we ask to have a private interview, and we have our long list of lots of things we want to ask. And then when we sit in front of them, it's like everything vanished. And we went, but I don't want to ask this, and why did I put this down, But there is no point in asking this, because it seems like they radiate some sort of state of being that is so relaxed that it seems like all our problems have just vanished, I sometimes force myself to ask the questions anyway, because the moment you go out of the room and you walk down the stairs, everything comes back again, and you say, oh, I should have asked. But when we're there, it's really like everything just melted down, and we don't even understand why we wrote those things down in the first place. So having these sort of people, meeting and knowing and being around these sort of people is very inspiring. It's like, the kid that says, wow, when I be grown up, I'd like to be like them, something like that. So that's why we also take refuge in the Sangha. Our spiritual friends that are more or less in the same level as we, because they also can support us, and they do. And mainly these special people who have realized and experienced what they're teaching, and that's what they are. So they become very inspiring, and it's very necessary, because it is it's not always an easy journey to sort of trying to train ourselves to get out of our own neuroses and habits and tendencies, some of them quite negative, that we have been suffering from since a long time. So I think that's okay, is it?
Oh, very good, thank you.
And so maybe we can start reciting this.
Yeah, just pass it out, people. Sing along if you want, or just listen
Or
to
not.
the
If you want to be inside with it, it's perfectly okay. The idea of a prayer, right? And when, as the paper passes by, I still can say this. The idea of saying a prayer in Buddhism, because many people ask this question. Since there is no God, then what's the point? To whom are we praying? Right? But a prayer in Buddhism, it's more often something that we recite in order for us to remember. It's not to forget, just to remind ourselves what we are here for. So it's not especially talking to anyone, it's talking to ourselves. It's like saying, okay, this is what I want. Yeah, thank you. You usually say it in Tibetan?
Yeah,
Also?
usually do Tibetan 3 times, and once in English,
Okay.
and then 4 American once.
It's kind of a low Tibetan, because it's an effort in Tibetan.
Yeah, it might not actually be anything like Tibetan. Samye Chabam Sochi Chabama Chanchu Dani Chasochi Dagi Jinsochi Be Sonanchi Rora Kachu Sanje Drupasho Samye Chabam Sochi Chabama Chanchu Dani Chasochi Dagi Jinsochi Pe Sonanchi Roa Penche Sanje Drupasho Sanje Chodam Sochi Chodama Chanchu Padu Dani Chatsunchi Dagi Jinsochi Pe Sonanchi Roa Penche Sanje Drupasho. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge into the enlightenment. Through the merit of my generosity and other virtues, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. May all beings have happiness and its causes. May all beings be free from suffering and its causes. May they never be separated from the supreme joy, untouched by suffering. May they abide in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion.
Okay. So, I have been asked to talk this evening about quite a philosophical subject. There is a very good book about this. There, which explains it in a very great detail, and it might be very interesting. The way the Dzongsa Khyentse Pachew wrote the book, explains in his introduction that once he was traveling by plane, and since he was in his monk's robes and everything, there was this guy sitting beside him who identified him as a Buddhist monk. So he started talking, and it was a long trip, so they had lots of time to talk. And he started asking him, sorts of questions like most people, all those cliches people have about Buddhist monks. Are you vegetarian? For instance, this is one question, or do you do this or do that? And then finally he asked him, because he said, no, not especially, we as Buddhists are not especially, or we're not obliged to be vegetarian, it's not part of the Buddhist way. And so he finally came to us, but then how would you describe or how would you define the Buddhist teachings? And so that gave him the idea of writing the book and taking from a sort of traditional teaching or traditional way, a philosophical way of describing what would be, what are the main characteristics of a Buddhist teaching. And it's put into 4 points, which are all quite philosophical. But the philosophy in Buddhism has also a very practical, it's also very practical, because it's not only something very theoretical, it's sort of the conclusion that we can come about from observing how reality and how the things function, as well the outer phenomena, as well our inner mind. So, and also, which is also the interesting part, Rinpoche would say, the fact that we can put or look for these four what they call the 4 seals or the 4 characteristics of a Buddhist teaching, is that anything, any teaching, any philosophy or anything that would have these 4 characteristics, even though it wouldn't be called a Dharma teaching, would still be a Dharma teaching, because it would convey the same sort of view that Buddhism conveys. And so I hope I won't be too, it won't be too, how you say?
Intellectual?
Yeah, or if you feel like sleeping, please feel free to do it. I hope you won't get too bored, but I try to make it practical. So the first point, then just to finish with the book, Dzogchen Tsering Paldron put this title to his book, which I find it's a good title. He put the book is called "What Makes You Not a Buddhist," because he wrote it the other way around. Like he wrote it for not necessarily for beginners, but for long-time practitioners. And the idea was for them to sort of check to see if, not in the philosophy, but in the practice and in the way of seeing the world and reacting to the different things, they were being Buddhist or not. So, and so it's interesting in that sense. Okay, so the first point is sorry. So the first point is all compounded things are impermanent. We can ask, or we can maybe say, since impermanence is something that we don't like, normally, we think we don't, then there is a little hope somewhere that says, oh, but maybe non-compounded things are permanent. The problem is, are there non-compounded things? So actually, I think when the Buddha said this, he might have said just, everything is impermanent. But then he said, all compounded things are impermanent. Well, actually, what he meant, I think, things are compounded and impermanent. So, as a way for us to reflect upon these two characteristics of the outer and inner world, because if we go that deep, then we can also observe that even our consciousness is not something. It's not something made of one piece. It's also something compounded, and it's also something very impermanent, even more so than whichever outer phenomena, isn't that? I mean, how many thoughts do we have just in 1 minute? Okay? This glass of water is also impermanent. If I leave it and I come back next week, it will probably have evaporated. But in 1 minute, I won't see that many changes. But during that minute, in my head, there had been, tens of thoughts and ideas and feelings and perceptions and all sorts of things. So I think the most impermanent of all phenomena is the mind, is extremely impermanent, is always changing. But so it's something that we can very easily observe by looking at things. The problem is somehow, there are reasons for that, but somehow impermanence is something that we always, quite often for us, there is a negative feeling about impermanence. It's like we hope and we think that things should be permanent, should stay, should be reliable. We are always hoping to be able to rely upon material and outer things, people and situations and objects and all of this. So when we hear about impermanence, there's always a little, we feel, impermanence, that's something I don't like. And so it's also a reality that even though we all know it exists, we are sort of never prepared for it. So every time things change, every time something ends, or every time there is some sort of big change or things like this, we always feel it quite often, perhaps not always, but quite often feel it as something negative. And even more so for the biggest sort of impermanence of all, which is in our experience death. And death is something that in our society we try to avoid. It's a subject that no one really wants to talk about. And and when something like that happens around us, someone dies suddenly, for instance, or there is always it's always a shock, like something happened that shouldn't have happened. So even though we know intellectually, we're sort of never prepared to meet with this impermanence. I think we have lots of proofs of that, and I'm sure in your lives you have come across the sudden death and things like this. And we are sort of shocked in the moment, and I don't know how about here, but in Portugal, when people meet at funerals, there is always this sentences that people usually say, like, oh yes, we are nothing, and we go back to nothingness, or things like this. But it's we are under a shock in this moment, but then we try as quickly as possible to forget about that, and come back to ordinary life, which means going back to all our habits and especially the habit of thinking that everything is permanent. And there was some strange accident happened last week, but now everything is normal again. So, well, when some big catastrophe happens, like the tsunami a few years ago, then everybody's shocked. Like something like that shouldn't have happened. It was not normal that a situation could change so quickly and so dramatically. But it is just the result of gathering of causes and conditions, and then suddenly something happens like that, and it is just the nature of things. Then again, we were all shocked, I'm sure. I was very shocked, and the world was very shocked. And then, a few weeks later, we just go back to, or even, just 2 days later or something, if we didn't have anyone close to us who was there at that moment, then it's even quicker. We just go back to our usual life and we forget about impermanence. So I think the idea in our society is that these things are so painful, and especially death, loss, are so painful that we have this idea that why bother thinking about it? When it happens, but we shouldn't be worrying about death when it's not there or when we don't have to. But the problem with that is what happens is that what we can see is if we are not aware of impermanence and death, then we actually don't live. It's a strange paradox, because we think that being aware of impermanence is a bit morbid. Like we imagine someone who is aware of impermanence, like someone who is always thinking about death, like with a black cloud above his head. But it's not like that. It's not in that sense. It's not with fear or anguish or projecting what might happen or anything, but it's just acknowledging the reality. And actually, if even perhaps not going to that extreme, but haven't you experienced something like this, knowing, for instance, that you're going to be separated from someone that you usually with, and perhaps you have best moments and not so good moments with that person. Sometimes you have discussion, or maybe you're not agreeing, or things like this. But knowing that you're going to be away for, let's say, 6 months or 1 year, suddenly, like the 2 last weeks or something like this, you're so fond of that person, aren't you? You won't find many occasions to argue, and even if you find, you say, okay, we're not going to argue, because next week we won't be together anymore, so why argue, This is just because perhaps, the people that we are arguing now, perhaps next week we won't be with them anymore, but we don't know. So we keep arguing, and not being of the same opinion, or arguing about stupid things. Generally, it's the case, but we don't know. So because we are not aware of impermanence, we manage to not be well actually with the people we are and enjoy the moments. And then, if we could live like this, separation wouldn't be so dramatic as it is. One of the worst things that people have when someone dies or something like this is a sort of regret. When you say, I have spent this many years with this person, but actually I was hardly ever with him or her. I have now this regret that I didn't spend more time, but not just time, that I haven't been more present when I could, when he was there, Isn't that often our regret when someone dies or goes away or when we separate? So, and why is that? I think this mainly happens because we are not aware of impermanence. If we were, we would spend more quality time with the ones who are around us, because we never know how much time we have left. But then when we say these sort of things, we might think of it in a very anguished way, like, how long do we have, But it's not in that sense. It's just enjoying, just be open and be aware that things pass. Even doesn't have to be so dramatic, but just, circumstances change. And for instance, now perhaps I have a job or I'm unemployed, for instance, as the case of many people. So it means I have now lots of time to spend with my children or with my wife or my husband or my parents or anyone because I'm unemployed. And sometimes I don't take advantage of that. Then I get a job and then again I don't have any time. And then I say, I should have spent more time when I had the occasion. So knowing about impermanence means being present here and now and aware that things change. Things keep changing all the time. So take advantage of the circumstances that we have now and be prepared for the possibility or even the certainty that they're going to change. This also helps when we are facing difficult circumstances. This is perhaps even more helpful at that time. Because when we face, like sometimes we have this impression that we got to some dead end, there is no way beyond this, or it's going to be like this forever, or, we don't know these things that is never going to change, or it's never going to get better or anything, but exactly the same thing we can apply at that moment. Things change, and sometimes they change very quickly, and very suddenly, and very unexpectedly also, So one of the things that I think helps a lot when we are in a difficult situation is thinking everything changes. This also, like these too shall pass. It's not going to stay like this forever. There is a story, I think I heard Bingo Tuk telling it, but I think it's a common story of a guy who was sentenced to a very long sentence, and he went to prison, and he was sort of lying in his cell, and he was desperate because he knew he had, 15 years or something to be in jail, and he was so desperate. Everything, like his life had come to an end. It's such a long time. So he didn't see any hope. And then suddenly he was lying in his back, and he looked at the ceiling and he looked at the walls, and then he saw a sentence written: "These too shall pass." And then it kind of struck him that someone who was not there anymore had written that sentence. And then there was this sudden realization that other people had been in that same cell before him, and all of them had gone. So him too, one day, he would be gone. And that sort of thing gave him some sort of peace. And he tried to, and I think it changed everything, according to the story. It changed everything. It changed his whole experience. And during the time he was in prison, he sort of became really a better person. And just by, in a very desperate situation, losing your freedom is something very desperate. In a very desperate situation, just the knowledge, the awareness that everything changes, and then nothing will stay the same forever. And even if you are in a very desperate situation, it will change. How many of us have been in desperate situations, or at least thought they were? Because sometimes it's not that desperate, it's just that we think it's very desperate. But we all survived. We are here, isn't it? So probably next time we will be in a desperate situation, just think this too shall pass. Might help, might help. So impermanence is a sort of how can you say, it's like a sword has two cutting edges. One side we can say it's something that we don't like because it seems to put an end to things that we enjoy, and so it surprises us and also gives us a feeling of insecurity or something like that. But then on the other side, impermanence also is something very the impact of and the knowledge and the awareness of impermanence can also be very positive, you know. I think I'm part of an association of volunteers in palliative care, accompanying people in terminal situations and their families. And this is a big lesson we all learn from these sort of situations, dealing with people who are approaching the end of their lives, is how valuable each instant of when we are in good health, when we have maybe we have material problems or everything, but we have good health and we have caring people around us and everything, so we are in a very good situation compared to other situations. So, and by being in the side of people who are we are approaching the moment of death, we can hear all their regrets, that are, like I was saying before, the regret that they have worked so much. This is one of the main regrets. I've worked so much and spent so little time with my family, and this is one big regret. And also, I have not done what I felt I was meant to do because of many reasons. And this is also a big regret. So when you are near to these sort of people often, then your approach to life begins to change. And I think impermanence, as the Buddha explained, becomes much more a reality. But it becomes comfortable, like I was saying, I was reading this afternoon this sentence. I think it's nice. It's like it's in the book, Dzongsa Khyentse's book. He says, "Prepare for the worst, but give room for the best." Be open to the best. This is the way he says about integrating the view of impermanence in our life in a comfortable way. Be prepared for the worst. I mean, it's not being so shocked as if it was something that was never meant to happen. Of course, death and separation will always be painful, but there is an aggravation if it's something that comes as a surprise. I was not. I never expected this to happen. But if you are aware that anything can happen, then at least you won't be so shocked. So this is a good thing. So prepare for the worst, or be prepared for the worst. But at the same time, it's not a negative way of seeing things, or it's not pessimistic. You also are open for the best, because everything is possible. What we call the best and the worst, because it's just our way of seeing things. But everything is possible, The next minute, anything can happen, actually. All things or many things happen when we don't expect them to happen, so anything can happen. So, all compounded things are impermanent. We could, of course, say much more about this, but let's keep it simple for tonight. And if we live with this reality, the more we accept and integrate this reality in our life, the more we will be at peace with whatever happens. I usually say, because I think because we have this strong negative feeling, and sort of death has become a taboo in our society. It's something we don't want to speak about, we don't want to think about. And so whenever these sort of issues are confronted, we feel quite uncomfortable because we think that thinking about impermanence would be something like thinking about that every day and all day, you know. But it's not that way. It's more like integrating this information. How can I say? So it doesn't take you by surprise. It's a little bit like, you know, if you live in a big city, you know there are traffic jams at certain times of the day. So if you want to go to, if you have an appointment at one of those hours, you know, rush hour, then you know you have to leave your home. If it would normally take like 15 minutes to get to that place, you know that you will have to have an extra half an hour or something like this. So this is nothing negative. You just go out of your home half an hour before what you would normally do, because you have this piece of information which is crucial. You know, if you have to take a plane, for instance, if you don't have this piece of information, you would miss your plane. So with this piece of information, you know that you have to take certain precautions, and then everything works fine. So knowing about impermanence is a bit the same thing. You don't have to think about it every day and all day, like you don't have to think all day, oh, there are traffic jams. Oh, it's such a horrible thing, you know. No, you just have to know about it, and whenever it's necessary, then you apply your knowledge, and you go out of your home half an hour before, and then everything works fine. So this is, it's a little bit like this. Of course, when you're stuck in the traffic, it's not especially pleasant, but at least you don't have the stress to say that I'm going to be late. Oh, I'm going to be late. You know that it will be fine, even if it's not very pleasant to be stuck in the traffic. So, okay, so this is about impermanence. So far, so good. Anyone has questions about it? Yes? Yes?
In the world of psychotherapy and counselling, quite a common phenomenon is people who tend to think everything's going to be a disaster, called catastrophic thinking, which isn't helpful in life, but in a way they're kind of overtuned to impermanence. Like if something difficult happens, they in their mind quickly goes to the most extreme situation. That might be death. Like, I've got a cold, but I think it's going to develop into a really serious chest infection, maybe pneumonia, and I might die. That sort of thing it is. So I wonder how that fits with the sort of idea that we don't think enough about impermanence.
Yeah, well, it all has to do with the fact that for people who have this negative tendency, it's very much, impermanence then is very much taken up by the fear, you know, and it's very related with the self, you know. It's the fear that I might disappear, or the impermanence might make me die, or it's very related with myself and the fear that is entailed of this notion of identity. So when we are talking here about thinking about impermanence, thinking is perhaps not the best word, because it's not thinking about impermanence. That's not what we're supposed to be doing, but it's sort of observing impermanence and sort of take it into account in our existence, that things change, but not necessarily the projecting the worst situations, because it's a more relaxed observation. You're just aware that things change, and once you relax a little bit about it, then you know that changes are not necessarily bad. It depends how you take them. And also, most of the suffering that we have due to impermanence, it's not due to the change, it's due to our resistance to the change. if we just let go, if we were able to let go in the middle of the change, then everything would go very smoothly. It's just because we're resisting, and it's from the resistance that the suffering comes. So of course, when you work in therapy, you're working with less functional egos, let's say. Ego is a dysfunction anyway. This sort of feeling of identity very strong that is separated from the others and things like this. It's dysfunctional anyway. But then it can be, there are degrees. And of course, when you work in therapy, you work with the most dysfunctional egos. And that's why dysfunctional in this sense means that there is a very strong feeling of identity, except it is in a negative way. So it is normal that people take impermanence as something very, very fearful, and that they have this sort of reaction. It's difficult to cope with. That's why they pay you. I suppose. That's the difficult part. Okay, so so this is the first point. And the thing is like everything in Buddhism, you might say it can be taken in a very philosophical way, but I think for us it has to be taken in a practical way. So knowing that everything is impermanent must be something that we integrate in our view of the world. As I said, not necessarily as an obsession, but as a piece of information that we have to integrate in our life, so that we are not so surprised and so shocked when it happens. Then there is a second point, which is emotion is pain. And here we might as well explain that the word that we Tibetans use for emotion is not the same. It doesn't have the same meaning. We have this emotions for us can be positive or negative. Like say, unconditional love is, you can say it's an emotion or a feeling. You can say it's an emotion, but it's positive. So, but actually the word we translate as emotion in Tibetan means something different. It's composed by two roots. The word is quite hard to pronounce. Tibetan is a strange language. It's nyurmon. And there are two roots here. One means dense, and the other means obscure. So, if think about hatred, for instance, or anger. When you're angry with something, then two things happen. One is that you feel tense, and the other one is that your sort of vision becomes obscure. By that they mean you stop seeing things clearly. You are so driven by your anger that things become distorted. You see, like if you're angry with someone, it's like that person is a demon, or he has done everything wrong, or So we are talking about this sort of emotions, and it's very quite obvious that they are painful. Some of them, it's very obvious that they are painful, but then others don't seem so obvious, or at least we have to reflect a little bit about it. Let's say, for instance, it's very easy to understand that anger is painful. Nobody really wants to be angry. I mean, some people have become so addicted to it that they almost think it's pleasant, or they don't know how to react differently, but But this is quite extreme cases. Normally people don't like to be angry. But then on the other hand, attachment, for instance, is sort of positively seen by many people. For instance, falling in love let's say, is something considered very positive in our society, even though once we are not into that state, we might also find that it actually entails lots of suffering. When you are really passionate about someone, it's like total suffering almost all the time. Has he phoned? No, he didn't. Then you're looking at the phone constantly to see if he texted. Did he? No, he didn't. Everything is, if the person looks at us and it's very, maybe he finds something wrong in me, or then if he doesn't, now he has no more interest, or, I don't need to explain. There was this movie, I can't remember the title, was something about love. And there was this young boy who was talking to his stepfather, and that his mother was dead not long ago, so he was acting a bit strange, and the stepfather was very worried. The boy must be, like 9 or something like this. So his stepfather is trying to know what's the problem, if it has something to do with the death of his boy's mother and things like this. And then after a while the boy says, well, its problem is that I am in love with one girl from my class. And then the father says, I thought it was something terrible. And the boy says, you want something more terrible than the agony of the agony of love. I think he had it very well, because it's a true agony. But still, we think it's a very good thing. It is shown to us in our societies as being marketed as something very nice, even though it is it puts us in total unrest, we are always in a very sort of uncomfortable situation. So this is why sometimes we need to look at all these emotions with a sort of fresher look. I could say even a little bit cynical, we might say, or at least not taking for granted things just because culturally they are supposed to be good or bad. All these sorts of emotions really don't serve us. They put us in a situation where we become dependent of others and other outside conditions, and in a situation of being dependent, yes, and then with lots of uncomfortable feelings. So doesn't mean that love is not something nice, but it depends what is it that we call love. We were talking about unconditional love. Well, unconditional love never puts us through agony. It's something very peaceful, it's something very warm, it's something that it's like radiating, like if you were, warm sun, and it just radiates warmth all around. And you don't need to be recognized, and if someone is, wearing sunglasses, you won't feel offended because it doesn't want to look at me or something like this. So it's something really totally free and totally comfortable. So, but this sort of love, what we call love, and that's actually a lot of attachment, it's very self-centered in a sense. We don't see it like that, of course. We have this impression that all we care is the other person. But we care for the other because it gives us feedback. It's like there was someone, I was watching television, and there was this program about raising cows somewhere, States perhaps, I don't know. And there was these people all talking about the comfort and the conditions when the cows were, I don't know, you don't say raised, you say breed? I don't know, anyway. And but the actual intention behind was that the meat would be more tasty. So, so we could say love would be, caring about those cows for them, to give them good conditions so they can be happy. And attachment is caring for those cows because if they're well cared for, they will give nicer meat. So when we have this sort of attachment towards people, we are like those guys who want to take care of cows because they will enjoy their meat better. I'm sorry to be so crude, but it's actually the truth. I'm sorry, it's actually the truth. It's whenever we feel this, of course. When we say we love someone, normally it's a mixture of both. It's a mixture of true love and true care, and then a mixture with attachment or a hope for something that could be given us back, And it all has to do with this sense of identity. In fact, what we call in Buddhism, we call ego. And which is not the same, it's not the same thing as the ego of psychology, but it's this sense of there is someone here who needs care, who needs attention, who needs to be recognized, who is the owner of this body and who is the owner of these feelings, and who identifies with all these thoughts and feelings and ideas, and not only identifies in the sense I am thinking but even becomes identified with objects, positions, opinions, to the point, even football clubs, to the point that the football club or the opinion or the stand or the idea or whatever becomes what we are. That's why in football matches the hooligans and the other guys, they clash, and to the point that they might hurt each other. Not because that has nothing to do with the club. It's just because the club became who they are, and so they fight for that. Like if it was a matter of survival, So this is our problem, and so the way the ego thrives on identification and also in separation. So we like to be like certain people, but we also like to make a point that we are not like certain people. I'm not like the others. I'm not like other people, or I'm not like my neighbor, or So all these emotions that can come up from this sense of self are painful. Whenever there is an emotion that, in the two words that I was saying previously, that is composing the word emotion in Tibetan, there was this sense of tension. Then tension is not only because we become tense, but actually because also our ego becomes denser. It becomes more tangible, more sort of solid. And also because of that, then there is sort of obscuration. We can't see things properly. We start seeing things in a very personal way. It's not everything. If someone says something a little bit unpleasant, it's like they are, it's like it's meant for me, or it's like haven't you ever had this sort of person you say, oh, you look nice today? And then they say, why? I don't look nice the other days? I am so awful the other day. So this is the sort of thing I mean, everything becomes very personal, and everything becomes very painful also, because you're so centered and so tense, and so your ego has become so existent, so present, that everything is hurtful. So that's why when we talk about this sort of emotions, we say, or the Buddha says, emotion is pain, is painful. These sort of emotions that thrive from the sense of self, because they also contribute to that sense of self, are extremely painful. The more we are centered on ourselves, the more we suffer. And the less we feel the separation with the others, and the less we are preoccupied with our own thoughts and our own struggles and our own projections and fears and everything, the more at peace we are. So this is even, it might sound strange or philosophical or theoretical, but whenever we observe in ourselves and around us, that's what we can see. It's the people who are more centered on themselves are the people who suffer the most. They have made some studies in the States, I think, and they arrived to the conclusion that the unhappier people were those who said the more often the word I. And I don't know exactly the proportion, but it seemed that the more you were preoccupied about yourself, the unhappier you are. So, emotions are painful. And I think it's necessary to talk about this, because sometimes we think, and it's very often and very common when we talk about this subject, the people say, yes, but for instance, fear or anger or attachment or this sort of emotions are indispensable for our survival. If, like people say, for instance, things like, if we didn't fear some things, then we might not survive in a difficult situation. But because we have this sort of unrealistic idea that if we were totally devoid of fear, then we would not know how to react if there was a lion or a tiger or some sort of someone pointing a gun to us or something like that, we would, just let ourselves be killed because we wouldn't fear the situation. But fear, and it's not because of fear that we might react in an appropriate way to a dangerous situation. Most of the times, fear is even an obstacle to react in an appropriate way in a difficult or in a stressful situation. Because of fear, we might overreact, and sometimes we even make the situation worse because of our fear. So it's not fear that protects us, and the fact that we don't feel fear wouldn't make us totally unconscious or unable to survive or have the proper reaction. It's a totally different thing to have fear. We can protect ourselves without fear. There is no contradiction to that. And on the opposite, fear will probably make it much worse, and anger certainly will. And there is also this sort of anecdote that because this is one of the things that people struggle with the most. There was this journalist who asked the Dalai Lama once what he would do. You Buddhists are always talking about non-violence, so what would you do if someone was, someone was threatening you with a gun and to the point of killing you, and you had a gun yourself, so would you shoot, or what would you do? And the Dalai Lama, said with a smile, well, I probably would shoot, yes. I would shoot to the legs. So in order that he wouldn't shoot, and then when I would be totally sure that he couldn't harm me anymore, I would go near and see if it was not too hurt, if he was not too hurt, and then he gave a big laugh. I think that's the thing, you know. When you're not afraid, then you protect yourself just what is needed. But if you were to react with anger, you would not just prevent that person from harming you. You would overreact to it, so you'll probably kill him or something like that. And that's not necessary. You just have to protect yourself. So, not having fear or not having anger or not having attachment, all those emotions are absolutely dispensable. We don't need them to survive. And that is something that, even though we might all agree with the fact that anger is something painful, sometimes we really need to reflect a little bit more on this, because we might still, somewhere in our minds, still think that fear and attachment and aversion and anger and all these things keep us safe or keep us, so maybe we need to go a little bit deeper and understand that. Of course, the fact of understanding is probably not enough to eradicate these feelings, because they all come from this idea of self, and until we have this idea of self, we won't be completely free from those emotions. But at least we will know that there's nothing positive about them. Even if sometimes it seems like they help or they could protect us, or even if all around us everybody thinks it's something good, we need to reflect in order to understand that there's nothing positive about them, and they are totally dispensable, and we won't be sort of vulnerable in the world because we don't have them. So that's the second point. If we find some teaching that says that everything is impermanent and that emotions are painful, it's already half of the Dharma. Then the third point is, now things get really tricky. And that is probably, you won't find many teachings, except perhaps modern quantum physics, that will agree with the next point, that it says everything is empty by nature, or nothing has any intrinsic nature. Now things get really philosophical. What do we mean by that? Everything is empty is totally contradictory with our experience in one sense, isn't it? Because when we stand on the floor, unless it's very old, we won't go through it, isn't it? Or if we hit a wall or a door, it will seem very solid, so we don't really understand how this can be true. But if we have been to school and we have learned lots of theoretical things, we have probably heard about atoms and protons and neutrons, and and now even more so like quantum particles and things like this. So actually, not in experience, but at least intellectually, this idea that things are not solid is not totally new for us. Not as it were at the time of the Buddha, for instance. It's much easier now for us because we have all these sophisticated concepts and we don't have the direct experience. Not even the scientists who have come about with all these nice theories about quantum physics and things like this, not even them have the experience, the direct experience of the emptiness of matter, of phenomena. But at least we have tools through intelligence and through reasoning and through observing and conceptualizing to a certain level, we have tools to understand that matter that seems so solid, it's actually almost nothing. Even if we just thought that at a macroscopic level, when we see and there is now lots of pictures, of galaxies and, all these wonderful, very beautiful things that we can see. And we see that there's almost nothing there. It's lots of space and almost anything, just light and things like this. Then we know that at the microscopic level, it's the same. So have you ever wondered why in between those two emptiness there is suddenly something very solid? Isn't it a bit strange that something so solid could be in between two very empty dimensions? We know that everything like this sheet of paper is composed of atoms, so we know that the constitutive particles and there is that sort of emptiness here this is almost nothing, but we still feel it like something, solid, existent, and all of this. So it's not a totally new concept for us, much less than it were at Buddha's time. And I think Buddha had a hard time explaining this to the people of his own time. And it is said in the teachings that the first time that the Buddha talked about emptiness, there was some sort of very strong reactions in the disciples. Some of them just died of heart attack because it was so shocking. Nowadays it doesn't come as much as a surprise as it was for them at that time, but still it totally contradicts our experience. The important thing about this is not speculating about the concept, but it's just to understand, for us to understand that things are not as solid as they seem to be. And especially, and I think this is the important part, because there are two aspects in this emptiness thing. Well, one aspect is the fact that we say that nothing has inherent existence, which means nothing exists on its own. And so the consequence of this, and the more practical aspect of emptiness, is that everything exists through interdependence, which means everything, any phenomena, might be exterior or even in the mind, nothing can exist without causes and conditions. So this is the important thing. And it doesn't, maybe even now, doesn't seem to be very sort of practical, but it is. And in the book, Dzongsa Khyentse gives a very good example. It was very enlightening for me, because it gives a very simple example. It says, if you want to cook an egg, boil a hard-boiled egg, you need a few things. You need a pan, you need water, you need egg, of course, and then you need fire, some source of heating. And if it's true fire, then you need matches or something, and some sort of gas or wood or something. Then it says, if one of these ingredients is missing, you won't be able to cook your egg. So if you have everything but a pan, there's a pot, there's no way you can cook your egg. Or if you have a pot but you don't have water, then the same happens. You might cook it in a different way, but it won't be hard-boiled. And then he says also something else, but if you have all the things together, and you have the fire, the pot, the water, and the egg, and if it remains together for a certain amount of time, there is no way the egg won't be cooked. This is When you put it the other way around, it also becomes very interesting. That means that whatever is happening in your life now is like egg cooking. It happened because there were a certain number of conditions that came about together. And then things happened in a certain way. So you're sort of having the result of a certain number of conditions getting together and for a certain amount of time, and then you get a certain sort of result. But when you are in a situation, let's say now you are in a certain situation, then if you have this knowledge and if you have this awareness, you know that even if you can change just one small piece of the conditions and the causes that brought about that event in your life, then the result will be different. And that's how change comes about, you know. If you start, normally when we have a problem, we think we have to solve the problem as a whole, you know. Tomorrow it has to be totally different. That might happen, but probably won't. So a much more realistic approach is when you understand interdependence, you know that the thing as it is now here is because there is a certain amount of circumstances, normally a lot of them. And in the case of the egg, it was quite simple, but any sort of situation is always much more complex. So for a certain situation to exist, it has to be a result of lots of causes and conditions. So by then you know that if you are able to change just one of them, you'll get a different result. And from that different result, there is an opening to change something else, and then something else, and then something else. And then after a while, you'll end up with a totally different situation. Even if, of course, you're probably thinking there are lots of things that I cannot change. Of course, in the beginning at least. But there's always one thing you can change, is your attitude towards the thing. There are lots of, among all those conditions, some of them depend directly on you. So those you can change, even one small thing. And then that's how you bring about change. And big changes start with small changes. Big changes start with the small steps, start with the small movement. And I think this knowledge makes a lot of difference in a practical way we deal with problems. Not necessarily the emptiness aspect as in itself, because it's a bit abstract for us to become practical. But the aspect of emptiness in the sense of interdependence, it is so practical and it's so useful when you understand how things work. Then you can sort of use that understanding in your own life to make everything easier, to make it work differently. So I think this example is absolutely brilliant because it's so simple. And we can understand the two aspects that when all the conditions are together, there is no way you won't have the result. I think this is very important. So, because we also always, sometimes we are a bit unrealistic, and we think that even if the conditions don't change, we would like the result to change. So we want to keep the same sort of situation, and that the outcome would be different, but that won't happen, because if you have all the conditions, the egg will be boiled, and there is nothing you can do about it. But if you just change a little thing, then the result might become different. Even if you have everything, but you won't cook it for, let's say, 5 minutes, but just for 3 minutes, then you won't have a hard-boiled egg, you'll have something else. So this is the way it works, and if you can apply this, if we can apply this in our lives, I'm sure it can help in a lot of situations to understand how things happen. And also that when we say, for instance, things like things don't happen randomly, we are not meaning that things were meant to happen because it was written somewhere. But things happen because all the causes and conditions were gathered. And when they're gathered, there's no way the result won't come. So this is what we mean in Buddhism, at least, when we say things don't happen just by chance. They happen as a result of causes and conditions. So this is the third point. Now the fourth. The fourth is that Nirvana or liberation, Buddha's state of being, Buddhahood, let's say, or whatever you want to call it, is beyond concepts, and especially beyond dualistic thinking or dualistic view. This is to say that this path of Buddhism points to something which is not like happiness, by contrast with suffering, for instance. It's not good as a contradiction to bad, or it's not something that can be put into this dualistic state of mind. We are always, caught in this good, bad, black, white, day, night, and everything. So we sometimes expect the spirituality, for instance, to be good, instead of bad. And we hope, sometimes we have these sort of expectations that Buddhist practitioners should be good people. Some are, and some aren't. But anyway, they're all trying to become Buddhas, supposedly, but they're not necessarily good people at the start. But Buddhahood, or this state of liberation, goes beyond. So that's why this is the fourth point, is that what we are aiming at is something, what they usually say in the Buddhist philosophy, is beyond the extremes. It's not extremist that we mean here, but the extremes being good, bad, white, black, and things like this. So what we're aiming for and what Buddhahood is, something beyond. It's not like happiness in contrast for suffering. It's something that goes beyond happiness and suffering. So it is often described as total peace or total liberation, a state that is no more tainted by I like, I don't like, I fear, I want, I'm running after, or I'm running away, or all this, all these opposites in which we live constantly. We must perhaps say here that from the ego point of view, whatever happens, or whoever we encounter, there is always this polarity. Whatever situation we are facing, it's immediately evaluated from the ego perspective. It's for me or against me. And so we do with people also. If someone smiles at us when we are presented, and takes notice of our existence in some way, that ego feels that I am recognized, this person likes me, then we like that person. We say, oh, he was so nice, he remembered me from the last time, things like this, And we do that even with spiritual teachers. If they look at us and say, oh, I liked him so much, And then if he sort of ignores us and says, oh, he's so rough. I don't like his teaching. So we also do with ordinary encounters. So if people acknowledge us in some way, then we like them. And if they're sort of rude or they don't pay much attention to our presence, then we think, oh, she's so unpleasant. Oh, that person, ooh. And then if there is no interest whatsoever, it's sort of neutral, you just ignore them, just dismiss them, because they represent nothing to the ego. They don't give him recognition, but they don't oppose either, so they're just non-existent in a sense. So Buddhahood is something totally different. We won't be caught anymore in this sort of duplicity game, in this duality of finding that anything, people or things that sort of enhance our sense of identity are not seen as pleasurable, and things that endanger or diminish our sense of identity are not seen as unpleasant, and there is no one towards whom we feel indifference, because it is a totally different state of being. There is no more need for recognition, there is no more fear of being, unknown or anonymous or non-recognized. So it's something totally different. It's more like the natural radiance of our own basic goodness. In a very sort of simple way, it's just something like that. Not long ago, I was doing a workshop with people, and I was talking about something like this. I can't remember the exact topic, but then I said to the people, think about someone or some being, can be your pet, that inspire you really lots of affection. I'm not talking about passion. I'm talking about affection, like a child, a baby, a small dog, a puppy, It's so cute. and I said, now for 1 minute, just think about someone like that. And just as here, suddenly I looked around and everybody had a sort of a sweet smile, in their faces. That smile comes from our sort of basic goodness. We're not, when we watch, and I had read this somewhere in the internet, that there was this guy whose dogs had a puppy, how do you call it? Lots of puppies, And he was very worried because they were at home, the puppies, and he was worried that something would happen to them while he was working. So he installed a webcam with IP, So when he was at work, he would, go and check if everything was okay. But then he gave this, it was a kind of web link to some friends. And then one day he discovered that there were hundreds of people looking at the puppies, And then there was some comments people were saying, that before I go to work every day, I spend 5 minutes watching the puppies play, because I'm so happy when I go out, I feel like there's something nice about it, and I feel very well once I stay for 5 minutes and I look at them. So this is the sort of thing. You're not expecting anything from those puppies, or that they give you some sort of recognition, or they admire you or anything. It's just so cute. It's just so fluffy. It's just so there is some sort of tenderness that comes with no expectation whatsoever. It's just cute. It's just something that makes your heart melts, and it has to be some really cold heart not to feel how fluffy or how cute they are. And so this is the sort of thing, and this sort of radiance, when it becomes fully acknowledged and it takes possession in a certain way of your own ego, then it becomes something. It's like the sun. It just radiates. It's not hoping for anything. It's not expecting anything. It won't be offended if you just close your window or or if you turn your back or you go to the cellar or anything, because he isn't expecting anything, and he won't categorize people in the day. Yes, those like me, they are lying in the sun, so it's very nice. This is really nice people. And then he doesn't feel awful people because they just went on the shade and they don't want to get burnt or something like this. He won't feel like that, so it's something really beyond. It's just, and it's not, even though we say it's beyond, it seems like it's something really far away or something that we will never be able to achieve. But it's our own nature, that has temporarily taken by some sort of tyrant that tries to use everything in its own benefit, which actually is totally the contrary. Or by doing that makes us miserable. So when we say Nirvana is beyond concepts, it's in the sense, the concepts of good and bad, or happy and unhappy, suffering and happiness, or day and night, and black and white, and all this junk that makes us really feel so miserable. And Nirvana or Buddhahood, or this basic intrinsic radiant nature of ours, which is basic goodness, tenderness, unbearable tenderness, this is my favorite expression, that we all know because we all have felt it, it's what we are actually, and then the rest is just fiction. Bad fiction. Bad fiction. A sort of very bad soap opera that nobody would pay to, well, actually lots of people pay to see, to watch, because it sort of mirrors all our struggles, so we don't feel so lonely when we see in television all these people, they say, I'm not the only one. It's so good to see that other people are also struggling like me. But really, we don't need all that. This is totally unnecessary, because we know much better, and we have much better inside ourselves. So there's not even something that someone has to give us. It's already here, and whenever you doubt about it, just remember about puppies. Just remember, and then you'll feel a sort of smile coming up, with a sort of warm feeling in your heart, because they're so cute and so innocent. If you think about babies, it will probably be the same, except if you see your own baby, and then again comes out the attachment and all these things, and he looks like me, or no, he says he looks like his father. And puppies, there's no problem. They don't look like me. It's kind of free of all these things. So I think there would have been much more things to say about it, but I think it's late, and also it's a vast subject. But it's one of those subjects that there's never a way to say everything. So we say a little bit, and then next time maybe we can explore it further if you have interest in that. But the thing about this is integrating even one of those principles in your life, believe me, makes a big difference. Just integrating the idea of impermanence, for instance, will make a big difference, because from that point we will start living in a very different way. The problem with impermanence is because of the ego and this need for this fear of non-existence, then the idea that everything changes is very challenging for him, so that's why we resist so much. But integrating this idea in our practical life will make a difference, and so all the other points. So I hope this helps. And it was really nice to be here. I don't know, at what time you generally end?
Well, we said till 10.
Sorry?
We said till 10 for this
Oh,
evening.
really?
So there's still time for people to stay a bit longer, or...
First, if you want to ask any question.
Can I have 3 questions I want to ask.
Wow. Okay.
Thank you very much for making the teachings accessible. I've heard these teachings a number of times on boiling eggs and puppies is very practical, very accessible. But I have 3 questions that I ask because I hope it will be helpful to ask them out loud.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is around why we so easily consider these teachings to be philosophical rather than, say, for example, religious. And I wonder if it's because the teachings are not ideological. So we can't easily say, okay, a teacher said do this, do this, do this, and then we attain X, and then we just go on and we do it. Because that's easy, that's very, it's lazy or easy or it's just straightforward. So I wonder if partly why so often these teachings are referred to as philosophical is because, unlike much religious teachings, they're not ideological. That doesn't undermine them or diminish them. I think they're immensely precious. I just wanted to kind of just tease that a little bit more about why we regard them as philosophical when actually as Buddhist teachings they're religious.
Yeah.
Second question then is, I'll just ask all 3 or you want to do
give me one by one, please. At my age. Memory. Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I think one possible answer, it depends who is teaching them. Now, you can teach them in a very philosophical way, but then again you can put them more into practice. Actually, those teachings are not different from all the other teachings of Buddhism. Just the opposite. It is supposed to be the 4 characteristics that define any Buddhist teaching. So we're just sort of synthesizing everything, summing up everything to say all Buddhist teaching can only be considered Buddhist if all these points are considered. So they are not supposed to be a practical way, they are supposed to be the characteristic of all the practical methods that are explained by Buddhism. That's probably the reason why they are not explained as practical teachings or practical methods, but as characteristics of all the practical methods. I just chose to put them in a more practical way because this is my, because I think that's what we need, and because I didn't have the time for talking about other methods, so I chose to put them in a more practical way. But they are often explained as philosophical points, yes.
Thank you. So the next question is about language and specifically about emotions and suffering. Because it's often very easy for us to understand things that we might regard as negative, like anger, and to understand that, but it can often be much harder to understand emotions that we often refer to as love. And why is that negative? And I've heard others, and I've asked the question myself before about, well, surely love is good, and so how can that be? I just wonder if there's something in this teaching and in wider teachings that's helpful around language when we think about compassion or loving kindness as useful words and language to distinguish from the emotions that we refer to when we talk about emotions of suffering. Because often if you're a parent or you're in a relationship, you're in this zone of perhaps of comfort around love is a good thing. I just heard a teacher say, love is an emotion, it's like other things, and what does that mean? It can often be really hard to get your head around. And I notice in many teachings that when Buddha talks about, and many teachers talk about, is compassion and loving kindness as distinct from what we in common parlance refer to as love. Like I love chocolate, or I love my partner, or I love my football team. Love is very overused, very widely used. So So I just wonder if there's something you could say about, in terms of the emotions of suffering, and then distinct from that, the mobility or the offering of compassion and loving kindness as distinct from the emotion.
Well, I was thinking about that the other day, because there is a word for emotions, like negative emotions, hatred, attachment, and all these things. But there isn't any general word for those sort of, not positive emotions, but those emotions like love, loving kindness, and compassion and things. They are thought of separately as different, like loving kindness, love, equanimity, and all these things. But I have separate words for that. But in Tibetan, to my knowledge at least, there is no general word for what we could call positive emotions. You know, so the word that we chose to translate as emotion is always in Tibetan is always negatively connotated, because it always has to do with ego. You know, it's the emotions that arise from the sense of identity, of separation, of duality, and all the others. But even then, there are also, even on the other compassion, for instance, there is also relative compassion and then sort of absolute compassion. Because compassion can also come from the ego, you know. Like I have compassion for my friends and my family and so on, but I won't have the same sort of feeling of wanting to help and, you know, relieve the suffering and things for my enemies, for instance, or the people I don't like. Or so this is not compassion in the true sense. And so it's a sort of, it's better than anger, let's say, but it's also very biased feeling. So in a sense, it's still dualistic compassion. So that's why and if we talk about compassion, that's why we need to have a practice like a Chenrezig practice, or the practice of compassion, because then we invoke some sort of archetype of this compassion which is not biased, the full compassion, which doesn't make any distinctions of enemies and friends and all of this, and even doesn't even need to be aroused by a difficult situation, for instance. So that's what they call mikme compassion, or mikme tujje in Tibetan, which means compassion without concepts. Which means it's like a continuous flow of warmness and tenderness, and, you know, just this very warm and cozy feeling that you have independently that there is someone in front of you or no one. Or even if the person who is in front of you is suffering or is happy, you'll still feel the same way. So this is, Chenrezig just embodies this sort of feeling. This is really beyond, because it's not triggered by any. Normally, when we are training in compassion, we have to think about someone we love and think that person is in a difficult situation, and then, slowly and difficult, it comes up. You know? So you're training, and in order to train, because we are so caught up in the relative world and in all these things, those I like and those I don't, and I don't like to suffer, and he doesn't like to suffer. And we have to go through all this construction in order to trigger that emotion in us. But it's still very dualistic. But at the highest level, which is our own nature, but at the highest level, like Chenrezig level, then nothing of this is necessary. It's just a continuous flow of love and tenderness that it's there naturally and needs no condition. It's unconditioned. And then this is something different. Okay? So, of course, since this is our nature, it's always present and perhaps probably mixed with other feelings. So when a father is really caring for his children, and there is of course a sense of self, and quite often there is a sense that my children are mine, and somehow they're part of my identity, so I care for them also because of that. But in the middle of that, the more we are open and the more we are sort of caring, then the true compassion is also there. This true feeling is also there. So there's nothing wrong about it. It's just that there's nothing wrong about being a good father or being a good husband or being a good wife. It's very good. You just have to be aware of the mixture of feelings and try to, keep a balance between them and sort of try to pull more in the unconditioned side and less in the expectations that from that relationship or from that circumstance or from that person you will receive some sort of recognition or enhancement of your identity. Okay.
Last question is about meditation. So in terms of, we have these four seals and the teachings are consistent with these four seals in regard to Dharma. And we can hold that as a thought, and we can hold that as we remember when we read a book or if we hear it, and we try and incorporate that. But could you say something about how the four seals and this teaching sits with the other advice and guidance we are given by teachers around meditation and things, and why that might be relevant in terms of helping us to train our minds to be able to just understand this a little deeper, a little better, or to remember it. For kind of what would the connection be between these teachings and meditation is a very practical kind of.
Well, meditation is our tool actually to carry these teachings from intellectual to practical, in a sense, because through meditation, nowadays everybody is talking about meditation, and especially mindfulness has become a very popular word, and all over the world they're using it pretty much for everything, for enterprises, for even USA are using for their soldiers, I heard. So it's been used in therapy, it's been used in post-traumatic stress, it's been used in everywhere. It's a good thing actually, but in the way the Buddha taught, meditation was actually, I was just this weekend at some teachings with Kanda Rinpoche, I don't know if you know her, and she was saying something that I had never heard before, and I've been around 40 years. Probably I don't know why I had never heard this, but she said, actually when the Buddha explained this teaching, he said, he condensed the whole of the Buddhist teaching in three words, she said. Silence, stillness, and non-thought, or non-attachment to thoughts. So this is pretty much meditation. Except, of course, we are not that simple. And it just sitting still in silence and not getting, having no grip on our thoughts is not something that most of us can do. So we have to go through all those others, hearing, teachings, philosophical, and Lojong and all this stuff. We have to go through that in order to become simple enough to just be able to be silent, stay still, and don't try to grasp the thoughts. So you can see through this, I think this is quite an illustration how important meditation is and how it sort of sums up everything. Because once you, of course, first of all, you have to calm your mind. That's the first point. Otherwise, nothing is possible because you're always jumping from a thought to another thought. But then once there is a certain sort of stillness coming to the mind, then you start observing. That's the point. It's not just to relieve the stress. It's just to be able to observe what is the mind, what is the what are the thoughts, where do they come from, what is the sort of reality, where do they dissolve, or where do they go when they're finished, and what is their reality, what is their power, and all these sorts of questions that that it is called, can be called vipassana, this observation, this sort of, it's a little bit like analytic meditation, but it's not rational entirely, it's just observing, and then you start understanding. All these points of tonight's talk become truly, you can see them and experience them. And that's what allows you to bring all these philosophical teachings into experience. It's meditation that allows you to do that. So meditation is crucial. Is really the core of because Buddha never meant to create a new doctrine. He wanted to show a practical way to become enlightened, to become aware. It was not caring about creating a new religion or a new philosophy. Of course, then in time everything became very complicated, and there were universities and with lots of teachers, and in India. And it became very sophisticated, but it was not meant to be that way, It was just silence, stillness, and non-thought. That's what he meant in the beginning. So, meditation is really the core of. But then, of course, he also taught the ethics and the view, of course. But I think it's through meditation that all these things are. It's the reason why we believe in science is because even though if someone tells me any object is composed by atoms and things like this, it's not something that I can see by myself because I've never seen an atom except a drawing or something, but not in reality. But I believe when someone tells me because it is supposed to be possible that I can also experience by myself if I have the proper tools. So Buddhism is a little bit like that also. Is that everything that is said in Buddhism, even if it sounds a bit strange, it's possible to be verified if I use the proper tools, and the proper tools is meditation. So this is how important meditation is. Yes?
I was going to go back, something I think connected to the first point, fourth point, and also something this gentleman said. And it's a point really for practitioners, as opposed to a general introduction to the Dharma, but impermanence, the moment of the difficulty on the bed in the cell, and we see it will pass. But also for the practitioner, attachment to those positive moments will pass. The puppies we see, yes, as well as the problems from work or the problems of money, they will all pass.
They will all pass, yes.
And this is teachings.
Yes, that's absolutely. And there was something Karmapa, I read somewhere, Karmapa said, and it has been very helpful for me in the last few months. It said, it was not exactly like this, but let me put it like this. It said, a traveler will see, if you are traveling, and I imagine myself in the train, for instance, when you look through the window, there are nice sightseeing, nice landscapes. And there are also not so nice things, but everything passes. It's very simple, but it has been very helpful, because if you take that to really to the latter, I mean, during the day, how many different feelings you have? Good, bad, wonderful, not so good, really horrible. But all that, in the end, is just landscapes, passing by. So if now it's good, then in 5 minutes it's bad, and then again it's good, and then again it's bad. There is nothing there that you should hold on to, because it will just pass, whether it's good or bad. So, of course, in the beginning, we tend to be a bit selective and try to hold on to positive things, but the more you practice, the idea is not going from hell to heaven. It's just that everything starts to have what they call rochi, same flavor. Not that you become indifferent, but that you become so aware of impermanence. And at the same time, you dwell into something that is, I wouldn't say awareness is not really, it's not permanent, but it's stability. So you dwell in a state of stability while the landscape just goes by, What you reach through meditation is not that there won't be any thoughts or there won't be any feelings. It's just that you don't dwell or identify yourself with those feelings. You dwell into a very sort of peaceful state. It's peaceful because it's more like a luminous state of luminosity and awareness, where you are aware of all these changes, but you don't identify with them and you don't go along with them. You don't jump out of the train because you just found a very nice landscape. You just remain seated, and enjoy whatever comes by, and you know that anyway in 5 seconds it won't be there anymore. Yeah, it's perhaps in the beginning this doesn't seem very appealing, but it is actually very, very nice. Yes?
I have a very imperfect understanding of Buddhism, and I understand that one of the great concepts is that we are in a state of eternal suffering, and enlightenment would allow us to escape from eternal suffering. But I do find a contradiction here, because you have been making the point, and this is something which I firmly believe in, is the transience. I'm going to make a very mundane description of this. I walk out of my front door every morning to go out and get my newspaper. And I might be thinking, oh Lord, what the hell am I going to do with this or that? Then I see somebody and we exchange a smile or a greeting. The suffering has been totally transient. It is no longer existing.
Mm-hmm.
And so this will continue. I might go back again to thinking about a problem. But then somebody else comes along, we exchange a smile or a greeting. And so I find, am I missing out on suffering? Because I don't seem to be getting enough of it.
How lucky of you. No. I think here the misunderstanding is about the word suffering. Because, of course, we are not in eternal suffering, fortunately. I mean, suffering as we conceive it, when we say suffering, we're generally talking about, real pain or at least uncomfortable feeling. But when the Buddha said, when you hear things like samsara, for instance, is suffering, the word that the Buddha used was dukkha. And dukkha in Sanskrit doesn't mean suffering. It means unsatisfactory. Something that, a state of frustration in a sense. And it's quite subtle. but it is the fact that we are always looking forward to be somewhere else, or with someone else, or in another situation. We are sort of never really here and now, not very often. We feel like totally comfortable here and now. We are always, or even if it happens, it just happens for a few very short moments, and then again we are thinking about what is going to happen next, or So it is the sense that we are never complete. There's like sort of feeling that there's always something missing, and that something missing, we might find it in something or someone, or next moment, or in the future somehow. So what the Buddha meant, something a little bit more subtle than just suffering. Of course, there is suffering, but then again, there are moments of happiness, relative happiness. Like the smile that I can exchange with someone, or of course, I look at something beautiful and I feel a sort of happiness. That's perfectly real. Yeah, it exists. It's not like we are always in a sort of boiling in hell. Of course not. We are lucky enough. Some people really are in a state of suffering almost continuously, but we are not in that case. But what the Buddha meant was something subtler. It was like this sort of feeling of never being complete, or never having everything, or there's always something missing. We are always expecting, like it might be somewhere, or it might be in the future, or it might be in the next moment, or something like that.
That's helpful, thank you.
Okay. So, I think, it's about time to...
People are thinking about the next thing. Alright. Bill, thank you so much for coming, Tsering. If you want to learn more about these four skills, Tsering will be teaching in London for a whole day on them. So if you've got more of the same, there'll be more meditation practice as well. If you want to know more about that, come and see me and I can tell you. Also on